When you begin to understand the nuance of your own genius, and you can accept that and lean into it without ego and pride, and just kind of lean into the idea that this is how it's wired. It becomes a responsibility to engage and deliver. Then you can see it in others, and you can help draw it out and help bring it forward and help them become comfortable with the same information.
Welcome to the point with Jeff Spikes, the show about achieving goals.
Hello and welcome to The
embracing
Point.
growth, and
This is an exciting time to be alive and to be focusing on dreams and goals and visions and making things happen in the world. There's so many advancements that so many are feeling fearful of and apprehensive. And it's actually a time of great expanse and change. So, no judgment on those that have a significant amount of apprehension and are putting good thought and wisdom towards what's happening. If that is you, this is probably a good place for you. As long as you're open-minded and really considering what you can do to be on the positive side of change. You know, today what you're going to learn about, and as you're listening, is to consider what's happening when you share a concept with people about strengths. We've been doing surveys lately and asking a lot of people, when you hear the word strengths, what do you think that means? As a concept or an idea, what do you think that that's really moving us towards, right? And I have a theory that says that when I'm speaking to a large crowd, let's say there's 1,000 people, and I say, what is your greatest strength? That at least one thought bubble, so there's at least 1,000, if not maybe 12 or 1,500 different thought bubbles that immediately go up into the air with what a strength is, and they're all slightly different. So considering what makes you unique is about your approach, your perception, and the choices you make. Based on your perception and the choices you make, even your approach, you might and probably do have a slightly different concept of what a strength is. Now, we've learned that strengths, when asked, is dependent on what environment you're in when you're listening. If you're in the gym and someone says, what's your greatest strength? You're more likely to say that it's physical. Oh, I'm my legs, my upper body, my lower body, and you'll make it about strength. You might in that environment say mental, that your greatest strength is your mental ability to push through and stay focused, or consistency. But it will be something about your ability to show up physically in the gym and do physical training most of the time. If you're in an environment of psychiatry and psychology, people might be thinking about the nuances of how the brain works and what the more sophisticated part of your brain is, if you're a better learner or an executor or something else, right? It might be a way of thinking that is the deal. But there are some basic, if you look in the dictionary and just start researching what a strength is based on that, there's basic universal definitions that are physical. I'm just going to look at them and read them for you. Physical, mental, moral, or character. And that's actually one that's come up quite a bit when asking people. Strength can also be about intensity. If somebody goes right to how they are, and they are the most resilient, or they're oftentimes measuring their level of intensity. There's numerical or collective strength, right? There's strength in numbers, if you're looking at polling or voting, or getting on one side of a cause versus the other. There's also an advantage or positive quality that is a strength, an attribute that sets you apart from others. Might be your beauty, might be your grace, your ability to jump high, and which is also a physical strength. But it might be some other positive quality or attribute. Might be your tonality and the way you use your voice. But this is what happens. There's 3 basic layers to this. There's awareness, there's action and being, and there's the science language mindset. So why am I sharing this? Well, I'm sharing this. If you are looking to influence a large group of people, if you run an association, or you're on the board of an association, or you're in any size company, or you're even just a member, if you're part of a company and you're managing a team or part of a team, your team, if you talk about strengths, has a multitude of different ideas of what that means, and creating a common framework of what that means and creating a common language can be very important, right? It anchors your sense of discussion. It anchors a strength in itself of unity, and of clear communication, which is it's a great strength that a company can have if they communicate very well. So it's it also brings balance, right? Strength is also about balance and about not the traditional balance that we might think of work and life and all these things, which, I've given up hope on that. It's not so much about, it's more about having life balance and having an understanding what's most important and valuing those things so that I get the amount of time that's necessary and wanted to really enhance all of those relationships and parts of me and things that I'm involved in. So, um, there's an idea of wanting to shift for certain. There's a potential pivot point that we want to talk about that can shift from this idea that we're broken to proficient, deficiency to proficiency. There's a big difference in a deficiency versus a proficiency mindset. Even if you believe in this human frailty over some higher, greater source, whether it's, a religious or spiritual concept there, or even an entity or a unit. The organization is extremely strong based on how it's structured, and I can potentially threaten it with my individuality. There's all these ways of looking at it, but there's an idea of not being broken, right? And to come from a proficiency mindset that you are resourceful. One says that I'm lacking resources, that I don't have the ability. One says I do have the resources and I do have the ability. This is not to confuse, again, with the moral side of the equation, because even in the idea of where I'm a human, which is not godly, which is not spiritual in nature, it's not universal in nature, and me being that way keeps me humble and doing all this. It's not to confuse with that either, because even in that structure, you want to be a better husband, wife, partner, sister, brother, worker, and moving towards being what you believe you can be, the best of yourself that you're being called to be within the structure, even of whatever it is you're believing in, the system you're believing in. There is a need to be at your very best and work within your very best. And that's what we're talking about. Staying in a sense of great resourcefulness to be able to truly be in flow and ease and effortlessness of your best self. So this this idea that instead of being broken, that every challenge carries this hidden strength, carries the key to unlock a new data point, a new thing to consider about yourself that just makes you uniquely great or strong in how you go about doing it. Whether it's nurturing someone else in the way of the human spirit or human soul, and being helpful and useful to an individual that's in trouble or that's trying to improve or working through something, or if it's just in basic tasks of things that need to get done for overall health, wellness, and cleanliness, it's really something else. So let's go down this idea really quick. There's an idea of really staying in a place of gratitude. And gratitude, you hear me talk about a lot. And gratitude is one of the most underrated energies out there. It truly does conquer all evil. If anything that you do, if you can enhance it and improve it with gratitude. So, you know, I'm grateful and I want to share my gratitude for how the idea of strengths has saved my life, right? It's allowed me to be a more resourceful and forward moving type of person. So when I was approaching change and shifting change, I went and joined the Marine Corps to go from what I didn't want anymore was to be undisciplined and unfocused, which was the feedback I was getting from the world. Now, somehow I was able to do a lot of things to accomplish what I needed to work my way out of a corner. I seem to be really good at moving myself out of a corner, out of trouble, out of a bad situation, right? So my personal story, when we talk about here's all the realm of strengths and the ideas that you have, and if you're trying to move an entire group, it's now how do you share your personal stories and other things that will, or how do you have someone else come in and share that you will attribute to helping others find something great about themselves in how they're going to help you reach the goal or achieve the improvement that you're wanting to achieve. If you're wanting to bring everyone together in their greatest self, you want to get on the same page. And Some of that is honoring the individual's perspective of what a strength looks like, of what a strength feels like, and what it is, and giving them that sense of ownership of what they believe is, and then coming in and working with, now, here's how we're going to frame it in the moment today. So first of all, knowing that there's so many different opinions and thoughts and ideas about how to define that, and then bringing everyone into a common definition. And the common definition there can be done through stories. So one way to bring everyone on the same page, if you know what you don't want, or you know the baseline of standard you're wanting to grow from, which maybe it is something you want, but you want to improve from it, and you know what you do want, you know what you want to grow towards, what you want to become, or what result you're wanting to create. It might be talking to somebody from an association that was looking at increasing the level of engagement, and the way they were doing that was increasing the count of the connections made that turned into actual actionable meetings between the buyers and the sellers at this particular event. And it was very services oriented, so it wasn't like widgets were being sold. It was very much about making valuable connections, so that both sides wanted a meeting and were actually had an actionable meeting before they left the event. They wanted an increase in those numbers, and they wanted then an increase in their ratings of how strong and how good the actual event was. And they had a few key points to that. So when you're wanting to gain a result from a large group of people, you then begin to consider how to speak to them within the realm of who they are and what they're looking to do and what their gifts are. So we first acknowledge what their strengths are. And then, based on stories, you start considering what are the stories that could be told in this environment that would help people come together. In that particular environment, the story was started with more of a lesson of what happens when you show up more authentically as yourself. And when you consider the idea that you're meeting each other's strategies of what it's like to be at a show and get your company visibility and make connections, or be at a show and find the right vendor, the right solution for what your team's looking for. So those are strategies of connecting and working with others, not necessarily getting to know people. And you might be able to be more effective if you just authentically, vulnerably get to know someone and share who you are and share why you're there, and maybe even what the ideal solution is. What is that one person you're dying to meet that if you could meet them, you believe would make all the difference in the world? Because they'd help you refine, define, make clarity on exactly what it was that you were offering, or you knew they had the need for what you were offering, and you were just had that much conviction. So then we pull out stories. Well, that a very compelling story that we may tell in a more detailed way could be the story of Igor Sikorsky when the helicopter was invented. You know, I had the opportunity to meet Sergei Sikorsky, and many years, it was 10, 15 years ago, and maybe longer, I don't have the exact time. There was a grand opening of a tool company that was happening by the airport near my house, and a smaller regional airport. And Igor was good friends, and I was there as also good friends of the people that owned it and that were opening it, this new plant. And I was there because I love smoking meat and I like bringing my smoker that's a trailer out and throwing parties and just being part of things that are exciting and bringing people together for a good cause. And so I was in service. I was there to be of service and hang out and help some friends. And Sergey was there for the same reason. He was there because he wanted to be around the airport, around airplanes, around people. And that was where he was getting that done. He used to live out in Sun City before he passed, but which was about, well, depending on when you're watching this, it was in 2025. But so we're sitting out on a park bench, on a picnic table bench out behind this building. And we sat there for hours as he told stories. But the main context of what he was sharing was that his father wasn't intently trying to build a helicopter. His father was doing his best to find a solution of how to save more lives, because a fixed wing airplane, having access to fixed wing airplanes, had saved people's lives, because those with resources could pay to have a plane come and pick someone up who was dying and get them to a hospital, get them to the help they needed faster. And that was saving lives. And Igor had this idea, and Sergey was talking about being 10 or 12 at the time. He had this idea that couldn't we save more lives? If we could come up with a better solution that could allow us to get people from a mountaintop or from an isolated valley or somewhere that they couldn't get a fixed wing airplane, what would that look like? Well, and that came to be ultimately the helicopter. But the moral of that story there is not so much that he was there with the idea to develop and design a helicopter. The idea was to improve on the fixed wing airplane so that there would be better ways to access remote spaces where you couldn't land a normal airplane so that lives could be saved. That was what was impassioning him. So that might be a good story for that. That also might be a bit of a stretch, might be motivating and fun to show slides and pictures and really get people thinking about that. Show impact Sergey as a 10 or 12-year-old sitting with other engineers, kids watching, playing while they watch their dads do what they're doing. And that can be kind of fun to do. It might bring some passion out of people, but maybe instead you bring up another story of how two members of that organization got to know each other on a deeper level and maybe volunteered on something and found a common ground and were able to become better support to each other and better partners in business, which ended up becoming some major change for their business. You might actually be able to find and spend time to learn a story right there that people could relate to that's in the community that you're wanting to impact. You might start looking for those stories of what happens when better relationships are built between two people, where they can get to understand really how each other works, what each other's strengths are, so that you can learn the benefit of being with that person. Because when you begin to understand the nuance of your own genius, and you can accept that and lean into it without ego and pride and just kind of lean into the idea that this is how I was wired. It becomes a responsibility to engage and deliver. Then you can see it in others and you can help draw it out and help bring it forward and help them become comfortable with the same information. And then it minimizes. It does the exact opposite of what you think it might do. And that one of the thoughts I had with this was that if everyone's just all running around in their greatness of how unique they are, then we're going to have a world of egomaniacs. But the reality is that when you have people really consistently aware that they can do this, that they can't do the same thing exactly the same way as someone else and be as good at it, but if they do it their way, they can make it happen. If they approach it, if they do it enough to own it and make it their own and then take their own approach, they might actually come up with a different, more creative, different result that's better based on how they perceive things and how they approached it. And that's where you find more interesting points to things that make things more meaningful and where epiphanies are found. And that collaborative spirit of everyone moving towards something. Also, others' needs that we don't necessarily value as much and understand become elevated is very important. And the idea that someone's covering those other needs that may not be the epiphany and the breakthrough become as important. And then the entire team becomes really aware of how they couldn't move forward as effectively, quickly, without everyone together. So you end up in an environment where the we culture, that group culture, that collaborative culture becomes the solution and the answer of how an individual can find their own greatness and really contribute in a positive way and feel fulfilled in what they're doing. And together they can all hit much better targets and goals than they could have before alone. That's kind of the magic of what strengths happens when you truly aim them together as a team. And if a company's giving you the goal, why not come together towards it? Oftentimes you find people not buying into the vision of a company or the vision of a team or a group because there's no way for them to uniquely connect in and actually win. They have to be somewhat separate and left out to really fit. Like I used to just despise, not really, but I used to drive me crazy when I'd have somebody that was doing the accounting of things tell me exactly how something needed to happen, how I couldn't achieve a customer service experience because of how something needed to be executed that affected the numbers. It used to drive me crazy. I'd say, make the numbers work for what's really happening in the sequence. And they'd be like, no, you got to change the sequence. It doesn't work. Well, that's how the sequence is working. So how do you stop clashing in those scenarios and really sink into making it happen is by looking at everyone's different gifts, their strengths, their perspectives, and the value that they're given based on the initiatives they have. You talk about looking companies and groups, how sometimes you end up in cliques. I'm listening to, things around my kids and grandkids' schools, and they're looking at this idea of how there's parent cliques and there's student cliques and there's all these other things. Well, that's one way. Well, when we grow up and we get into companies, they become silos and you have competing values. But as an executive, I've always wanted the values of both departments, or all three or all four departments, all working in unison, because I need, in supply chain versus accounting, I need the goods and materials there. So I need one person to be saying PO or no PO, or following the rules or not following the rules. I need this in the right place at the right time for this to happen. Right. And if I'm doing it wrong, sure, I need to be corrected. I need to improve it and I need to get better. But by God, that's got to be there when I said it was going to be there. So whatever I need to do to get it there, I will. Well, then you can make the improvements. Well, that causes a huge threat. That was my attitude. Well, then there's this huge threat to the accounting of it. Well, you may have gotten it there and we end up paying twice for it, or we end up, having, how you have no way of controlling the cost based on how you actually executed that, which was sometimes true. Then we get into arguments over, well, do you want the service to be done or do you want to fail? Because if you fail, you're not going to get the business again. You end up in these arguments. Well, when you as an executive, I learned that I wanted both of those arguments happening. And you want both of those arguments happening, but you want resolution and smooth. You want each other, you want to have each team and the people on the team truly impassioned and free to do what they're doing, and the ability to call each other out on it and improve it so that the right things happen each time. That's when you get real balance and real forward movement. So you bring now the strengths of those individuals and why they're in the roles they're in, and help them share values. Because ultimately, the highest level value is you want profit. You want ease of service. You all want the right thing to be there at the right time. Although accountants will say, no, well, not really if we're gonna bankrupt us. And I want that value, right? Because I need them yelling. I need them to going to the top of the mountain and saying, hey, this isn't working if something's at threat, right? If there's a threat. So that's an idea of how strengths work and why in a large group of people, you want more people coming together with their perspective and their values, not just based on their role, but also based on their approach. Oftentimes in those scenarios, the approach alone, there might be someone on one of the other teams that their approach helps the rest of the team buy into and understand that competing value and help that team move forward towards a resolution. And leveraging and measuring and learning how to measure with that team and how to benchmark with that team and what to watch for differently based on the makeup of the strengths of the individuals on the team. You get into some real nuance. Yet in corporations, one of the things that we find is that leaders are served, CEOs, CFOs, VPs, and are oftentimes served. They get coaches, they get training, they get sent away to seminars. And they're often very good about getting the next level out and getting them exposure for their career. And they've advanced enough to get some time at different places. But what happens is you as a leader, you want to have your teams all the way down as far as you can, fully adapting to and adopting all that they need to help your goals be attained and reached. Because you have a refuse to fail attitude. You want to ensure, and you have your strategies of how you will ensure that your numbers will be met and that the goals you said will be met. But imagine how much simpler that is if you stop just requiring those directors and senior to mid-level managers learn to then develop all of these gifts and all these people that work for them. If you actually put a structure and a process in place that helps elevate that and move that forward, that helps everyone begin to understand how they fit in. And that's how, when you create a culture of innovation, when you create a culture of strengths where everyone's looking at what's working to move forward, you have a way of catching the things that are going to bite you if you don't, because they're going to come up anyway. So you're still catching those things as you will normally in the sense of your critical mind working, and you'll still put all the measurements and benchmarks in place. You'll do all the audits and the inventories and everything else necessary. At the same time, you'll be moving forward with this idea of improving on what's working well and finding more ways to continue enhancing and improving on that, elevating your overall success. Your numbers are guaranteed to get better, and the results and the measurements you're using are guaranteed to improve. And what you find is that you're able to put much more on your teams without, as a matter of fact, you'll have but not be putting more on your teams. They'll be asking for more because the excitement and the fulfillment will be there. And they'll be like, hey, now that we're doing these three things, we could just duplicate that over here and get an entire new sense of movement towards the goals. So that's how we've walked into organizations. And at times of ambiguity, when a leader's getting ready to leave, or you have an entirely new system, or you've had to let go of a number of people because you just because you have to hit the numbers and you have to create savings goals. And so then how do you redirect a team that now feels overstaffed, understaffed? There's all these nuances that happen within organizations that put you into a place of uncertainty. And you do your best and everyone works really, really hard. But imagine if they just started working better within the nuance of how they're working, and they end up using less effort to get more done. Well, that's entirely possible. So that will be on the next episode. Today, the episode was really all about what are strengths and why focus on them, and what happens when you're in a larger group and how it accentuates beyond just that individual growth. Because we want to stop having to just use these models and these ways of moving just to increase our engagement and the satisfaction of our employees, because certainly we want that because that does glean a better result for us. But also, if you're like me and you're looking at organizations, that also doesn't necessarily attribute to you hitting the goals you need to hit. So if you bring it all together and actually aim everyone's effort towards what you need, towards the targets you have, and create all the sub-level goals, and aim everyone moving, get everyone moving together jointly in this and collaboratively in a forward moving way, and put in the systems and process. So now you have a culture of growth and innovation, and you have a culture where it's normal to call each other out on things without combat, without fighting. And when there are a certain level of dissension, that it triggers events that cause brainstorming groups and other whatever it is that your development teams and that your managers and senior level leaders need. Then you as a leader managing thousands of people have a massively increased reach and influence. Your touch points just naturally gain because everyone in the organization has seen this crafted messaging and this understanding of what the vision is that you've created. And somebody's taken the time to go in and make sure that that is throughout your entire organization, a clarity of vision and purpose of moving forward. And you can now measure not only just the skill, but the intention moving towards the goal. So now you have your ability and your willingness, your spirit and your function, and you're able to measure both based on the values you put into place and the behaviors that you actually end up being able to create behaviors to help people see what it looks like to be showing up in a way that values the result you're looking for. And then you can reward that. So together we're so much stronger. And this is what that means. And it seems like such a big lift, but once someone's feeling somewhat nourished and fulfilled in what they're doing and realizing that they're really gaining something for themselves along the way, and they're amazed at their level of participation, and you also start seeing where the real leaders are and who's gifted at the different points in different areas. Short story, that you look at Starbucks, and when I was back at Starbucks and I went to tour the roasting plant in Seattle before they had roasting plants all over the world. And, I met some people that were part of the family that were the original workers on the packaging lines that were packaging the coffee. And it was a family that grew, and they all bought the stock. They told us, one of them told me about how they leveraged their homes to the hilt and went all in and bought as much stock as they could when there was the offer made. And they're all multimillionaires at this point, and they still work at the time, they were still working on the packaging lines, helping improve and helping do things. But they were also finding their places where they were most happy working, where they felt the most fulfilled with their specific purpose of what allowed them to live the life they wanted to live. That's where the magic really happens. So, what are the possibilities for you? And where are the gains that you can make? You may need me to come in and help you see that. You may need someone else to come in and help you see that. But don't not see it. Whatever you do, don't let opportunities pass without at least looking for the answers of how to pull everyone together into one mode to share that solid, real vision and goal of what's happened. And the more buy-in and the more detail and the more accountability you create, the faster you'll have movement. So more weeks to come. We'll continue talking. We'll continue sharing and interviewing people on these exact topics of how to move yourself and your groups and your teams and your organizations forward faster, stronger, and better, so that you can be in that group of goal achieving people that are just making groundbreaking, earth-shattering change that's changing your life and all the people's lives that you're with. So looking forward to seeing you next time. In the time being, be your best self. Lean into the nuance of your genius. We'll see you then.